Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think I see if they get the lights off so you can actually see the slides over there. Today's presentation is Handguns of World War I, focusing on the lesser-known handguns. All right. Reason for that, by the way, is because we could do a whole 2-hour presentation just on 1911s or Lugers, on broom handles. So I'm going to actually concentrate on the guns that you probably haven't seen. If you've taken a look at some of these, you look at it and go, I never even saw that before. So I'm concentrating on some of those lesser guns that are not as well known. So what I'm going to cover is why handguns in World War I, kind of why handguns at all in World War I, why we have these lesser known handguns, a little bit about the development of handgun technology just prior to World War I, kind of leading into it. There's a lot of good stuff going on there. Going to also talk about some the collector aspects of World War I firearms, or handguns specifically, that you need to be aware of. Then we're going to talk about the combatants in the war. We're going to then talk about and show the Central Powers handguns and the Allied Powers handguns. All right, so let's start off with why handguns. Everyone kind of knows, well, it's actually rifles, machine guns, and artillery that win battles, of course, along with strategy and all the other neat stuff. People typically don't think of handguns so much as something that's really important. Certainly not in like the World War I time frame. So, why do we have them? Well, first off, for officers, they don't walk around carrying rifles in most cases. It's a nice symbol of rank. Also, for other troops where it's not convenient for them to carry long arms, so artillery troops, guards, guarding people they've captured, police, military police, or just police in general, and others where just rifles just not as practical, right? So handgun makes a lot of sense. That it's useful for those kinds of jobs. Also in the trenches, useful for hand-to-hand combat along with your knife. All right, so that's why we have these handguns in the trenches. Now, why the lesser-known handguns? Why do I want to talk about those? Again, lots of variety because they are lesser known. And each of them kind of have interesting backgrounds in terms of how they got, brought into service. But the key is that what happened with World War I, if you think about it, was no one was prepared for the size of that war. No one had enough arms to arm anywhere near a third of the troops that they were going to need. So everyone's scrambling for rifles, artillery, and also handguns. Right, so what they had to do is impress into service things that they either used to use in the past, but now were thought to be obsolete, or they had to go and make some emergency purchases, like go out to Spain and buy a whole bunch of guns, whatever you can get your hands on, because we need something, we can't produce it fast enough in country here. Now, some of the pistols, interestingly enough, got into service because the officers didn't like the pistols that they were issued by their arsenals. And they had the right to do that, and certainly the militaries. So they said, hey, I don't really like this gun you're giving me, I'm going to go buy one of my own. Right? And they were impressed into service. In fact, the arsenal in many cases bought these for the officers, and they're actually military proved. But it's another way that you get some of these lesser known handguns. If you think about it, why would somebody want to carry a 32 ACP or 7.65 if they could carry something bigger? All right, well, a lot of that, it wasn't the military decided to do that. A lot of it was private purchase. Also, as I said, the standard handguns cannot be produced quickly enough. So, some considerations for collectors, things to think about. Number one, when you're looking at a gun, and you're saying, hey, do I really want to get this gun? It's the right model for World War I. It's got probably a serial number within their World War I years. So does it fit into my World War I collection? The answer is maybe, because what can happen is you may have a standard arm. Some of these, even some of the 32s, are actually standard arms that were used by the military. You may have some which were arsenal purchased for officers, and those will have the appropriate military markings in most militaries. Then you'll have that military official emergency purchase. Like I said, run out to Spain because we got to go buy some guns, we can't find any. But they might also be private purchase. Now, all of those would qualify as military guns. All right, any one of those situations. The only problem is on a lot of these guns, there were commercial models and they were sold commercially at the same time that they were used in the military. How do you know which one you got? So So that's something you want to think about. It's good to have a representative example, but if you really say, I want one that went through the war, you need to do a little bit more work. So where do you want to look? You want to look at markings on the gun. We're going to talk about what some of those markings are. It's actually pretty easy for Germans. Germans love making markings. So we're going to talk about what those markings are. You can look at serial numbers or year of manufacture stored on the, actually on the gun. Or you can also look at bringback papers. Okay, that actually came back across from overseas, you know, with an American troop. And usually, by the way, they came back like in World War II, even though they were World War I guns. So you can have capture papers. So that gives you some real provenance, right? It says, yes, I know this thing was out there. But at least the military markings tell you at least it was accepted into military arsenals and it was sent out for use by troops. Ever make it to battle, you still don't know for sure. But again, provenance is a little bit difficult, particularly if a pistol has no markings on it that indicate it was anything but commercial, but it was a private purchase and was used extensively in the war. Right, so just kind of keep that in mind. Obviously, the ones that are condition being the same, the ones that are military marked or have some provenance for military use are typically more expensive than the same model that was just used for commercial. Good news is they're fun to play with. There's some real oddballs up here. I'm going to show some of these things. They're really kind of strange. You have no idea why did someone come up with doing it this way. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. There's a lot of transitional models. All right, people going from sort of the old cap and ball revolvers up to semi-automatic handguns. You know, what happened in between? There were a lot of sort of branches of the tree that just sort of withered and died and went no further. Some of those guns were kind of up here as World War I guns. So they're fun to play with. They're pretty rugged, which is good. Most of these guns, if you look at a Ruby, you know, the Ruby, the cheap Spanish pistol, I mean, you know, it's like a brick. You know, it's overly heavy. It's like overly constructed. So my Ruby pistols, I have never had a problem shooting any of them and do so very comfortably. Other thing for collectors that's nice to know is many of these pistols are appropriate for both World War I and World War II collections. So you kind of get double bang for the buck. In particular, you look at the French arms. What the French had going into World War I is basically what they reissued for World War II, plus, you know, like one semi-automatic. Whereas actually there's some additional semi-automatics that they bought from outside, but it wasn't tremendous volume. Right, so you know, a lot of guns, World War I, also work for your World War II collection. Interestingly enough, some of these guns go even further. One of these guns in particular could have been Franco-Prussian War. It could have been American Civil War, because it was used in the American Civil War. In fact, the one I have up here may more likely be a Civil War one than one that was actually used in World War I. All right, but it was used, and we'll talk about what that gun is, but it was used in all those different wars. So it's kind of cool. You get kind of double bang for the buck. Anything that was made after World War I cannot be used as a World War I gun. It was only a World War II gun. But a lot of the World War I guns were also used in World War II, so it was appropriate for either one. Easy to obtain ammo on a lot of these. 32 ACP, no problem. 9mm on a bunch of these, no problem. Some of them have some real oddball calibers that you probably have to, you know, load yourself. It's really hard to find ammo for it, hard to find brass. Typically you have to make the brass in some of these. But the good news is they're very rugged. Most of these guns, particularly the ones that were designed for service, are very rugged and they just hold up really well. All right, it's again like kind of a brick. It's really hard to damage these things. So let's talk about that handgun development before World War I. What do we have? First off, we start with the cap and ball revolver. Okay, great, you know, advancement, worked great in the Civil War. Cap and ball revolver was a great thing. All right, but then it kind of branched off two different ways. They said, okay, we want a self-contained cartridge. So actually, even during the Civil War, they came up with the pinfire cartridge and the centerfire cartridge, both. So they actually go back that far. So in revolvers, cap and ball became pinfire and or centerfire. You had black powder, obviously, well before World War I, but starting with around 1886 and the French discovering smokeless, there was a general conversion to smokeless powder. So a lot of these guns started off as black powder, and then they later on made smokeless loads for them. So you had the transition from smokeless to black powder to smokeless. At the same time, they saw with smokeless they could get a lot more energy out of that smaller case with, you know, the same amount of measure of powder. And they said that we can actually go with smaller diameter bore, smaller diameter bullets. So there's a fairly big move from big bore to smaller bore but in some cases, and back to big bore, as in the United States, which we'll talk about when we get to the U.S. guns. Single action versus double action. You know, our single action, 1873 Colt, we thought was really tremendous. But even well before that, we had some military double action guns that were being used. And double action guns are a lot more. If I pull the trigger at any of the double action guns up here, 95% of them are going to work just like they did when they came out of the factory. You take a Colt double action from the late 19th century, not so much. All right, so you know they're very, very rugged and well made. Then you have removable cylinders. Like, how do you load these things? The worst case of all is pull out the pin, take out the cylinder, use that pin you just pulled out to knock out the cartridge casings, reload the cylinder, put the cylinder back in the gun, and then load the pin back in, make sure you have everything all lined up again. All right? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But one of the militaries actually started off with that as their revolver. All right, which is kind of crazy. Then, of course, the big advancement was the loading gate that would open. All right, so like a single action Colt. Loading gate would open, so now you can just turn it. One technology which was an advancement was adding the body system, which allowed you to, this is really kind of weird, in order to turn the cylinder, you pull the trigger. As long as the loading gate was open, it won't fire. All right, but it'll turn the cylinder. So put a round in, pull the trigger. Put a round in, pull the trigger. And that's how you actually load the round. And then once you close the loading gate, it's now usable. So that was kind of an advancement back then. Then, of course, you also had the break open action guns. And there's some variety there also. The break open action is great because when you do the break open, it kind of all at once throws out all the cartridges. And you can even use like a speed loader to load, all the chambers all at once. Or certainly it was very easy to load all at once, but the unload was very much quicker than using the single action, or open gate and try to push one round out at a time, turning the cylinder sort of like you would with a single action Army Colt. So the other advancement was the swing open. And we all think of Smith & Wesson and Colt with the swing open revolver, where the cylinder opens to the left. There's a couple up here where they open to the right. All right, so it's kind of a little bit different. They hadn't figured out which way they're going to go with it yet. But the swing open cylinder was also one of the other advancements. On the semi-automatic side, if you think about semi-automatics, they really weren't practical until the late 1890s. That's the first time where they understood smokeless powder. And with just black powder, there was no way to have a semi-automatic that was really going to function for very long, like more than one magazine worth before it was time to clean it. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work. So smokeless powder allowed for the first time to have practical semi-automatic handguns. So they said, how are we going to load these things? Well, there's two solutions. One was we'll leave the magazine in the gun and we use stripper clips, just like we do with our Mauser, Mauser rifles. Or we're going to use stripper clips. So a bunch of the guns up here use that technique. Other ones do have removable magazines. Some put the magazine in front of the trigger guard. Some put it behind the trigger guard into the grip. Some put the magazine release, where it is nowadays, right behind the trigger guard. Other people put it on the heel of the actual firearm. So a lot of variety there. A lot of things hadn't quite settled down yet. So let's talk about the war itself. Let's start with the combatants. Okay, who was in the war? We're going to talk about each of the guns by country of manufacture. I kind of have them sorted here by country of manufacture, not by who used them, because a lot of these guns were used by multiple countries. So I kind of use country of manufacture to kind of sort them out. So let's talk about the Central Powers. Central Powers, the bad guys. Okay, the Central Powers, because it went right down the center of Europe. And we had Austria-Hungary, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which people said these are the guys that actually started the war. Of course, they'll say no, it was the Serbians who shot our Archduke. But they kind of started the war, or began with the war. Germany immediately jumped in. And then you had the Ottoman Empire, now what we think of as Turkey, actually a much bigger Turkey, jumps in. And then latecomer, after they saw who they think was going to win, they bet on the wrong horse. Bulgaria said, hey, we're going to join the Central Powers. All right, there were a bunch of people that kind of entered late. It was mostly on the Allied side because they wanted some spoils by entering the war. Right, so those were the combatants. Now, the interesting thing is most of the excitement is about Germany, okay, because they had the best military machine. Even Tsar Nicholas said about the Ottoman Empire, they are the sick man of Europe. Right, the Ottoman Empire was very weak. They were on their way down. They're kind of failing because they had much, much too big an empire. They had all kinds of problems, particularly in the Middle Eastern section of their empire, which continues to go on today, I guess. So they were kind of the sick man of Europe. although my favorite quote was actually about the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As the war progressed, they weren't quite able to do anything really right. So what happened was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, well, I'll talk about it when we get to the picture of it, and I'll describe it there. But by about the middle of the war, I guess it was Kaiser Wilhelm said that he was now shackled to a corpse. And talking about he had to drag Austria-Hungary. In other words, every time they had a problem, German troops had to go in and rescue them. All right, so again, Germany was the one who did sort of most of the heavy lifting here. Bulgaria not hardly any at all. And the other two were not all that strong. So this is sort of something doomed to failure from the start. So if you talk about the combatants on the Allied power side, or we'll start off as the Entente powers, you got Belgium in it from very early. England, France are very early. Greece. Italy joined in a little bit late, hoping to get some spoils of war from these portions of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Montenegro in right from the beginning. Portugal in a little bit late. Romania, one of those who said, we're not sure who's going to win here. At least they picked the right side. They entered very late in the war. Russia from the very beginning. Serbia from the very beginning, because they were the ones initially attacked by Austria. And then another latecomer, United States. Okay, we sort of came in at just around, sort of to take up all the slack when Russia kind of pulled out of the war and kind of freed up that eastern front. We were able to shore up the folks on the western front side. Probably were key to winning the war. Right, so the theaters of battle, where did battle take place? Well, basically it took place in the actual battlegrounds are in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Middle East. People go, Africa? Really? Oh, you mean like Northern Africa? No, Southern Africa, all over Africa. Why? Because of the colonies. There were German colonies there, and there were all kinds of fighting that went on there. After a while, it was sort of like, you kept going until the end of the war, but no one really cared anymore because nothing was really happening. But the fighting continued to go on. Certainly Asia, both sides of Asia, because there was fighting over on over where the Germans had colonial interests in China. Right, of course, Japan jumping in there to see what they could do. So it happened there, but in the Middle East, a lot happened in the Middle East. All right, there was a lot of fighting there also. It wasn't just the Western Front, and oh yeah, that's right, there was the Eastern Front also. No, it was actually much more than that. If you look at this map, this actually is showing pictures, really anything that's colored in, other than white and a few of the other colors, are countries that were impacted. There were new countries formed, countries' borders changed. The colonial aspects, what was going on there all changed, so a lot happened in World War I. Let's jump into Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was kind of a weird thing. It's the red border, is what you're looking at there. But it's a conglomerate of a bunch of different countries, different cultures, different languages. All right, started off being the old Holy Roman Empire way back when. It grew up, and it was sort of in its decline. But in there you had people who were Czech, who were Slovak, who were Polish, Romanian, Croatians. You had, and of course, Austria and Hungary. All right, the dual monarchy. So there's a conglomerate of different kinds of people out there, kind of held together, sort of. Very difficult, though, in terms of the actual battles that were going on, because you didn't necessarily speak the same language as your officer. Right? So it kind of made for a little bit of a messy situation. Let's jump into some of the guns. One I don't have on the table here is a Gasser Model 1870. This was actually used in World War I. What did they do? They dredged it out of, where they stuck it away, thinking they're never going to use it again. They dredged it out of inventory and brought that out there. That one is about 11 millimeter. And oh, one thing I didn't talk about was transition. There was also a transition from iron guns to steel guns. All right, this was made of iron. This is just made of iron, this particular Gasser Model 1870. The later ones were made of steel, but there are still some iron guns up here. So it's not that strong a gun. It had a really big cartridge, but not loaded that powerfully. So Austria originally designed it. Belgium made some copies, and it was primarily used by Austria. This one's a fun one. If you saw this gun up here, this one's been shortened. All right, so this was not the original barrel length. Was a bit longer. This is a Gasser Montenegrin. It's a little bit later. There's two varieties. One is a solid frame, like the one I have here. It's 11.2 millimeters. They were designed in Austria, also built in Belgium. But the primary nations using it for World War I, even the Austrians weren't using it anymore. Montenegro and Serbia were using it. What's really weird about this gun is that the cylinder looks really large, and it's got to be. Why? Because it takes the Warrendale cartridge that you put into carbines. Full load. I can't imagine what it was like trying to shoot this, okay? It's bad enough shooting anything with a carbine loaded in it, but that was a fairly powerful round. But the guns are actually pretty robust, and they make two different types. This one, and also one that was like a break open, although I think the first one, solid frame, is a bit more robust. But that one fired the same cartridge. And people ask, is that bone or is that what? On the grips, I don't know if it's bone or if it's ivory. I'm not sure how to tell. Right, so, Rast Model 1898, modern revolver. This was used by Austria. They continued to make it right through World War I. It was a very popular gun. It's actually a finely made gun. Again, it went down to its smokeless design and went down to 8mm, and a cartridge called 8mm gasser. And they kept all of them. They didn't go out any place. One of the things you can see on here, by the way, right there, is a unit marking. The Austrians were particularly good on unit markings on all their, or most of their handguns and rifles. So it, again, helps the provenance. You could actually, if you can find the right decoder ring table, tell you what, was this a infantry unit, was it a whatever unit. All right, these things are actually marked on many of the guns in different styles. The markings are on them. Right, so nice revolver. Worked really nice, but again, it was a drop the loading gauge and load it one round at a time, unload it one round at a time. Next, this is one of the really pretty guns. I really love the looks of this gun. The one I have up here right now, it's a Mannlicher Model 1905. And there were two models. This was a kind of slight improvement over the Model 1901. Beautiful gun, really fine lines and really well made. Kind of an anemic cartridge, unfortunately. But a fun gun. This particular one, though, was not actually used in Austria. This one was actually sold over to Argentina or Chile. I forgot which now. But the crest is actually taken off. The crest was put on, now it's been taken off. But it's the exact same gun and the exact same cartridge. Next, Steyr Model 1907. This one is a particularly ugly one, but it's the only one I got, so I brought it. I got it fairly cheaply, right? Cheap sort of guy. I got it really cheap. What's cool about this one is that it is, let's make sure we are completely loaded. Okay, now it's like really stuck. Okay, right now I can't get the action open, so I'm not going to pull the trigger. The action on this is a double action trigger. This was actually designed for the cavalry. It was not designed for the infantry. Why? They have a nice long hard trigger pull, same reason New York City did for their police department. Make it really hard to have an accidental discharge. When you're up on horse, really easy to have an accidental discharge. Well, here it's striker fired. It sounds kind of like Glock. Striker fired, but the firing pin is not cocked at all by actually cycling the slide. The only thing that's going to cock it and release it is pulling on the trigger. So it has kind of a hefty trigger pull, but not a bad gun. The only problem there is anemic cartridge. And troops other than cavalry didn't like it, so only the cavalry used it. One gun that was sort of almost a modern gun here for Austria. This was the Steyr Hahn Model 1912. It takes a 9mm Steyr cartridge, which is a little bit bigger than a regular 9mm Parabellum, but it's stripper clip loaded. So you lock the stripper clip in there, push the rounds in, pull it out, hit the release, and it chambers the first round. But no removable magazine. It was so rigorous, or so rugged rather, and so well liked that come World War II, what the Germans did, they captured the whole inventory of these things, and they converted most of them over to 9mm and used it in World War II. It was still a highly regarded gun there. Kind of looks a little old, some strange stuff on there, like the pin you have to pull out in order to take it apart, but not a bad gun, and fun to shoot. And the cartridges are still available commercially. Next, and this was actually a Hungarian gun. It's a Fromer stop. What's unique about this gun is, instead of it being blowback or a locked breech, like the last couple of guns we were looking at were locked breech, here what you've got is a delayed blowback. But basically what happens is, there is something that causes the return of the slide to happen more slowly. It kind of retards the coming back to allow all the chamber, all the pressures to go away so they don't come popping back in your face. The only thing is, it's only firing a 32 ACP cartridge. Why they invested that here, I don't know. but it's only 32. They did make this also in the 380, but it was issued in 32 for the Austro-Hungarian army. But it's kind of a nice gun. There's actually two of them up here, so you want to come and take a look at them later, be my guest. Next, Steyr 1908, really pretty gun, but it's sort of like a pocket pistol. Okay, it looks sort of like fairly small. Right, think a pocket pistol, really kind of small in 32, but it was used, and only used by Austria. Okay, let's talk about Germany. Germany, the whole big area of Germany here, looking at all around here, that was Germany going into World War I. All right, East Prussia was not detached as it was later, or lost as it was later still. It shrunk down to just what you see, in the red here eventually. We lost a lot of the lands from World War I and from World War II. All right, so Germany, before we go into the guns, one thing I want to talk to you about Germany is markings. These are really hard to find on the internet. The only place I could find them was actually I had to copy them from a book that I had and kind of paste them together so you can see them all in one place. But these are the Imperial German acceptance marks. So if you're looking at just about any German handgun that was used in the military, and which marks are on which guns sort of changes a bit, but all guns will have the crown over end. Right? That crown end is really a commercial proof mark, and you're going to find that on just about any of the German manufactured guns during the Imperial period. However, all these other markings here are military acceptance markings. Right? These were actually put on, at the arsenal, and different. I'm not even sure if it was different inspectors or what it was, but they had these different kind of markings. One particular gun might only have 3 of these on there. Another one might have any one of 5 of these on there. But if that one's on there, and you can see it on the pistols up here, if you take a look later, I'll show it to you. You can see that where they're marked, that definitely says this was a military issue pistol. All right, so this is a fun revolver, Reich's revolver. This is the 1879 version. All right, 10.6 millimeter. This is what Germany went into World War I with, which was, obviously a little older than World War I. But for the revolvers, this is what they were issuing. Okay, how do I reload this? That's the one, pull the pin, take out the cylinder that I was describing before. If you think the Germans, of all people, all right, with some of the other stuff like the Luger and the broom handle later on, that they would have thought of something better. What they did do is in 1883, they now made a slightly shorter version called the model 1883, but basically the same cartridge, same problem. All right, not really much of an advancement. And I'm not sure why it needed safety, but it's got a safety on it also. So what did the German officers do and German troops? They said, I don't want this piece of crap. So what they did was, they went out and bought stuff like this. They went first to Smith & Wesson Model 3, made in the US, and they actually went and bought them for themselves to use. Because if you're going to have a revolver, that's a lot cooler revolver than that Reich's revolver. Why? Because it's break open, because it's a, it's still single action, but it's break open, it's very, fine gun, well made, accurate, nice cartridge in it, 44 Russian. Now these originally started off because Russia wanted this particular gun, Smith & Wesson number 3 and 44 Russian. And the Russians liked it so much that after the US stopped shipping them over there, Germany actually set up a factory and was manufacturing copies and sending them over to Russia. And then when Germany actually couldn't do it anymore, Russia started making their own. All right, so you may find these actually in any one of 3 locations, made in any one of 3 locations. Okay, of course, Luger. We're not going to spend any time on it today. There's a couple examples on the table, which are stands. I actually don't even have a World War I Luger. I only have World War II. But yes, 7.63, 9mm. This was one, the main standard arm that everyone knows from World War I Germany. And then the artillery Luger, of course, you put a nice little shoulder stock on the end of that guy. You have almost a little carbine, which is great for artillery guys who don't have anything but handguns. They can't carry rifles with them. So it makes tremendous sense. But again, that one does have a magazine, and it put the magazine release in the right place, which is kind of cool. Then the C96 Mauser. C96 Mauser actually preceded it. It was made in 2 calibers, 7.63mm or 9mm, made in Germany, but used by Austria, Bulgaria, Germany, Turkey, England, Italy, and Russia. All these countries actually acquired versions of this gun to use in the military. Okay, Dreyse Model 1907. Again, sort of a big pocket pistol. There's a couple of examples of it up here. It's just sort of a large pocket pistol in 32 ACP, but it was used exclusively for military use, and not a bad gun, but it's another one of the 32 blowback pistols. Mauser 1914, more finely made, a nice gun. Most of these are actually, that you can find in the market, are commercial. You won't find them with military markings quite as much, but they're all 32 ACP. But it's a nice gun, well made, has some unique little quirks, but when you understand them, it's kind of a fun gun. Walther Model 4. This one here typically does have military markings on it. It's 32 ACP, nice little gun. But some of those markings I showed you before you want to look for on this particular gun also. Dreyse 9mm. They actually stuck 9mm parabellum into a blowback kind of a Dreyse on steroids, a bigger one. Not very popular. I've never even seen one because they were used briefly and pulled out of service. Why? Because it was like hell to pull back the spring on the slide, so it was blowback. Pull back the slide rather, because it's a very heavy duty spring, and the recoil just was very stiff. All right, so not a lot of interest in the gun, and I don't think it wasn't as reliable as they wanted either. Next, the Langenhahn, which I couldn't find my Langenhahn at home. I do have one of these. In fact, this is a picture of it. But it's also a 9mm, slightly bigger than pocket pistol size, you know, sort of interchangeable with some of the other guns that we've seen here. Sauer 1913. This actually is a pretty gun. There's a pretty nice example of one up here in pretty nice shape. But still kind of a pocket pistol, still 32 ACP. Has some nice little features on it. And my probably favorite feature is, oh, actually not on this gun. On one of the other guns is what we have is the barrel actually pops down. You'll see it in a second. Oh, in fact, it is this one. I grabbed the wrong gun. No, the Sauer doesn't have it. The next gun does. I'll get this right. Okay, no. Walther Model 6 is another gun out there that I don't have in the collection. 9mm, same problem. It was blowback, and it just didn't make it. Valhalla, there's a couple of those here. There's a Valhalla and there's a Menta here. They're identical guns, almost identical looking, but 32 ACP, small pocket pistol size, nothing too exciting. Okay, Belgium is next. Belgium, my favorite gun coming up, little Belgium here, is the La Fachot revolver. This is that pinfire revolver. And the example is, well, my French guns are over here. Could have been used in the Civil War, could have been used in World War I. All right, Franco-Prussian War, could have been used in any one of those three. So it's a nice single action gun. It's got a loading gate. So you put the cartridges one by one. The only difference is, and I have one cartridge here which stays very separate from the gun. But there's a cartridge here in case you want to see what does that pinfire thing look like. What happens is the pin actually sticks up from the cylinder. The hammer comes down and it hits that pin. That pin is what hits the primer. All right, so I always am nervous about even carrying this in any way, shape, or form because it's exposed. It's not like you have the little primer cup and it's sort of hidden away. The primer stick is sticking out there. If you do drop it on the ground and it lands on that, it will go off. The cartridge will go off. All right, so it's kind of an interim technology or transitional technology, but it's kind of a cool gun, kind of a pretty gun. Civil War right up until certainly World War I. Now, it wasn't used very much in World War I, but some people still were using that as a gun. In fact, Russia had it because, again, Russia will take anything. They have such a shortage of pistols, they will take anything you can give us. Next one, heavy-duty gun, Chevalot d'Avignon, 1871 and 1872. 1871 was made in Belgium for Belgium. Model 1872 was made in Belgium and Italy for the Italian military. So I always get this confused. 10.35 is Italian, 10.4 is Belgian. I might have it reversed. Anyone know? You can still buy the Italian ammo. You got it right? Okay.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure about that. It's kind of a big gun, all right, but very rugged. Okay, this one here, if I just go here and go, yep, that one's absolutely empty. Not an easy trigger pull, but it works, okay? So they're actually pretty vigorous, or rugged rather, but the thing is, getting the cartridges out was still the old, let's lift up the little thing and let's put them out one at a time. But very well-made gun that kind of lasts a long time. Has lasted a long time. Also, the Belgians took a slightly smaller kind of version of this gun, made some improvements, and it had the body action, the thing I told you about before, which you pull the trigger in order to turn the cylinder while you're doing the loading. As long as the loading gate's open, it won't fire, supposedly. That wasn't in service all that long. Also, Belgium made a bunch of copies of Smith & Wesson 1881, and there's one up here. And why did they do that? Because the Russians, again, loved that Smith & Wesson. Well, now they got one in double action. They said, we want it. Well, they couldn't get it from Smith & Wesson, so Belgium made copies of it and sold it to Russia. Right, so there's at least one example of that up here. Actually, there's two examples of that up here. Next, revolver model 1915. This is all Belgian made. It's kind of an ugly gun. It's got a really ugly hammer on it. I don't know why the hammer had to be so ugly. But it's not a particularly pretty gun, but it does, like a Dan Wesson, you can actually release the cylinder here and pop it open, so it has a swing open cylinder. But it's an 8mm Lebel, which was the round that was really being used by the French. It was built and sold to the French only, the only ones that used it. Burgundy Bayard, really nice gun, fairly expensive to make, really fine gun. The biggest history contribution was the cartridge. The 9mm Bergman is the one that Spain later took, 9mm Largo, and was used right through the 50s, 60s, 70s in a number of Latin American countries. So it's slightly longer than the regular 9mm. FN Browning 1900, which is really kind of cool because the barrel is down here, the spring is up here, the barrel is down below, so it actually feels very nice to shoot these. I have shot mine, and I have two examples of it here. All right, so it was one of the earliest successful, but 32 ACP, semi-automatic handguns. FN Browning 1903, this is slightly bigger. Now the one I have here is actually not one, it's an FN 1903, it's 1903, but it's a copy made by Sweden for Sweden, okay, under license. But I don't have a 1903. Stan, did you have this? Stan's got one. Okay, cool. So check out Stan's, he's got a real one. This one was actually Swedish.
I have the Colt 1903 made for the Belgians.
Ah, okay. Oh, that's right. That's not quite the same. Yeah, it's actually kind of a different gun. Right, so again, tremendous variety here, right? But that one shot 9mm long, all right, which is 380 is the short, 9mm long is the extended version. The cartridge can't get them anymore. Actually, I did buy some recently. It's hard to find them. All right, next, FN Browning 1910. I think that the controversy or the questions are over. Yes, Archduke was killed by a model 1910 to start the World War I. All right. It was not the 1900. It was this particular gun model 1910. It's a nice gun though. Striker fired, got a nice safety on it. It actually is very accurate, but it's again 32 ACP. Also used by Belgium, Serbia, and Germany. Because after Germany kind of took over Belgium, they had the run of it with these guns also. Next, this is one of my favorite little guns, and there's actually three of them up here. Okay, because it's teeny tiny. Okay, it's really small, right? Yeah, it's cute, right? So it's the size of, today's 32 ACP pistols, right? And it was a 32 ACP, has military markings on it. These guns were actually acquired for the military. And, when you think about it, whether the 32 ACP is this size, or if it's going to be something gigantic, relatively speaking, like this, I think I'd rather have the smaller, all right? This way, at least I can keep it in my pocket. So it's actually a nice gun, fun guns. Okay, let's talk about Italy. Italy entered the war a little bit late. Now notice who the neighbor is here, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so their thought was, hey, we want to get Trieste and some of these other areas and add them back into Italy. We'll do so by getting into this war. Now, there were only three guns that I couldn't find, and I gave up. I couldn't find the Bodeos, which is coming up right now, but I do have the 1889 Type 1 Bodeo revolver in 10.35 Italian. All right, and it's kind of a, it's sort of like a normal Nagant, maybe with kind of a strange grip on it. It's not a bad gun, double action. Then they made model for Type 2, which was made for the enlisted men. All right, why the enlisted men didn't deserve a trigger guard, I'm not quite sure. But then you get a trigger guard. Instead, the trigger is hinged up, and when you cock the hammer, it drops down into place. All right, so you can go, and it'll stay down until you lock it back up in place. The holster is kind of funny because the holster, which I don't have one here, is actually really skinny through here because there's no trigger guard. So I can see why maybe it makes a little bit of sense, but I didn't think it was worth having officers with trigger guard, enlisted men without. But that was sort of the thing. Next gun is one of the prettier guns. Gosenti Model 1910. Really love the Glicenti. There's one up here. It fires a cartridge though, which is a little weird. It's a 9mm Glicenti, and the 9mm Glicenti is the exact same size as a 9mm Parabellum. Typically the bullet is a little more pointed, but it's the exact same size. So guess what? 9mm Parabellum fits into this gun. So when all these guns came back after World War I, World War II, what did people do? They stuck 9mm Parabellums in it. It ain't made for that because a Parabellum is something like 30 or 40% more energy. So a lot of people blew them up. So you don't find too many Glicentis anymore. They're fine as long as you stick with the Glicenti ammunition, which is very downloaded 9mm. But a nice semi-automatic, you know, very smooth lines on it, and works well. It's got a little field magazine grip on it. Next, Beretta 1915. Looks more like a typical Beretta. You can start seeing the beginning of that open top on the slide with the exposed barrel. This was a 32 ACP and it came out first. I don't have one of these on the table, but what I do have is the one that was the bigger brother of it, which was a model 1915, and it was a 9mm Glicenti, that same round we were talking about before. So it is up here and it's just a little bit bigger. There's so many guns I can't find it.
I think, Larry, you brought a small one, didn't you?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah, he's got one.
Oh, you got the small one, the model 1915?
You want to see it?
Cool, you can put up here, show it next to its big brother. All right, this one is the one in 9mm Glicenti. So if you wouldn't mind leaving it up here so folks can see what the difference in size is. But it's considerable, but the lines look very much the same. Nice gun, as long as you use right ammo on it. Spain. All right, what is Spain doing here? Spain wasn't in the war, right? That's right, they were not. Oh yeah, super. In fact, let me hold that up right now. All right, just so you can see the difference. I mean, they're identical kind of guns in terms of everything looks the same, the safeties look the same, everything looks the same. One's just a lot smaller than the other one. 32 ACP versus 9mm Glicenti. And this one's like much heavier. Okay, Spain. Spain was a neutral power along with Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Switzerland. Everyone else in Europe was on one side of the war or the other. So Spain was in a nice situation because they were isolated from any of the battles, and they continued to do business as usual. They were not in the war. And business as usual for northern Spain was manufacturing guns. So now they had all these contracts primarily from France more than anyone else. France needed guns more than anyone else. So what did Spain do? Well, this one's got an unusual one. This looks like a Smith & Wesson break open, right? Okay, it's not. It's made by one of two companies. I have examples of both of them up here. Tracchiola or Orbea. And these are the English names for when the British military took these guns in. The British military bought these as emergency purchase guns. And they held up fairly well throughout all of World War I. Yeah, they were made in Spain, and they were made in 455 for the Brits, and they were made in 44 Russian for Romania. All right, so good number of these were produced. Eventually, I think the surplus was destroyed at the end of, I think it was World War II, it wasn't even World War I. But they're actually fairly strong guns. You can take a look at them up here. They're very, strongly made, and they work well. Double action just keeps on working on these guns. Double action, Smith & Wesson copies. There's another example of the same gun, but with the action broken open. And then there's this. It looks like a Smith & Wesson. No, this is made in Spain or France in 8mm Lebel. And it's called 92 Spanish. It's actually just a Smith & Wesson copy. We also make copies of Colts. If you pull back, release instead of the push forward. Another one, this one made by the other firm. One's Orbea, one's Tracchiola. We got the 92 Spanish. Looks a little bit different. There's an example of both of these up here. And then the Ruby pistol. Ruby pistols shouldn't really be a model. It's a category of guns. The French went out and said, I want these semi-automatics. This one sort of looks like a shrunken down 1903 FN, and they're cheap enough, we want it. All right, there's like 15 different companies that were making these, and they were not interchangeable parts. For the most part, not even interchangeable magazines from one manufacturer to the other. All right, so it's sort of a family of guns that they just called Ruby. We all shot 32 ACP. They're all built like bricks. I think I have 3 of them up here, 2 with holsters. They're just built like bricks. They're really heavy-duty guns, and they do fire. Keep lubricated, they'll keep firing. But look at the difference between this one, which is an Astra, which later went on to become the Astra Company, which survived right up until the 80s, I think it was, or maybe 90s. But the Astra was, if you look at it, particularly back here, and then we go to the next one, now here it's rounded. This is supposed to be the same gun. And it's made by another of the good manufacturers, Romanos Visnigi, but it's completely different. So the magazines, one with the change, but they're both called rubies. French bought these by the thousands. Not only did France buy them, Italy and Serbia bought them because they couldn't produce their handguns in the home market as quickly as they could. Another Spanish manufacturer is Steyr. You may know the name because Steyr stayed in business right up until about the 90s. They sort of survived World War I very well. It's a different gun than the Ruby. It's actually, I think, better made. And it's kind of unique. It's got an exposed hammer here. There's a couple of unique characteristics about it. Kind of a nice gun. I don't have one in my collection, though. I've not been able to land one yet. France. All right, what did France do? 1873, French model revolver. And we have, let's see, France is over here. All right. We have actually 2 copies of the 1873. They were produced in the white. All right, they didn't blue them. So if it's blue, it happened after the war sometime. They're just issued in the white to the troops. And it's not a bad gun, 11 millimeter, heavy as a brick, can't break it. All the double actions, just continue to work on these guns, are really good. And these are recognizable by having no flutes on the cylinder. All right, let's say you know it's an 1873, and because it's in the white. We also made an 1874 model, which is for the officers. The officers model does have flutes, and it is blue. Okay, well, the bluing on this one's kind of faded, but it actually held up a lot better than the guns that were in the white. All right, so, you know, there's the blue version right here, the officer's model. These were used and then put away when the next revolver came out, which is model 1892. This is when they downsized to 8 millimeter Lebel, and these were all made in France. However, eventually Greece and Serbia also started getting these as France had enough of these to start shipping over there. What happened though is World War I, so they said, oops, these ain't enough, we're not quite going to be satisfied with these, so they dragged those 1873s and 1874s back out of the warehouses and reissued those guns also. Japan. Yes, Japan was in the war, and after the war they cried that we didn't give them enough prizes from having participated in the war, but they certainly did fight Germans in the colonies over there. Japan, Type 26 revolver. Type 26 revolver, if I were issued this, I'd probably throw it away and see if I can grab another gun. Where is my Type 26? Here it is. Okay, let's just make sure. It's a break open, which is kind of nice. Goes break open, so throws the cartridges out, which is really nice. Quick to load. But it's got the so it is unloaded, by the way, so I'm going to pull the trigger. It's got a really ugly double action trigger. All right, just, you know, you can't tell when it's going to go off. It's just not that good a gun. All right, it's one of the main reasons that the Japanese officers in particular went out and bought other guns. They did issue the Type A and Type B Baby and Papa Nambus, which is not to be confused with the later Nambus that we're all familiar with from World War II. And they came out in the 2 calibers, 8 millimeter Nambu or 7 millimeter Nambu, still kind of anemic. Oh, by the way, going back here, this gun was in 9 millimeter Japanese. If you take if I remember correctly, it was a 9 millimeter Parabellum, thin out the rim, you can actually, and shorten it, you can actually create cartridges for this. All right, but then the rim's so thin you never get to reload it. All right, but so not too bad to reload, but you're not going to find this ammunition commercially anywhere. These guns kind of nice, very rare. I don't have them. You don't see them too often, and they're not cheap. Okay, but also the Japanese did, if you remember from some of the earlier things, they ended up getting Smith & Wesson Model 3 and some of the other guns that were being made in these other countries, because the officers and even the enlistment didn't really like the choice of guns that they had. Let's talk about Russia. All right, Russia is gigantic. Okay, this has all different pictures of the different expansion and contraction and different sizes, but certainly gigantic. So Russia, what did they like? Well, first off, Russia did not really have a good industry at home for manufacturing handguns. All right. So what did they do? They got their guns from elsewhere. If they really liked them, they just started manufacturing them themselves in country. This one's kind of a neat gun, very pricey to get. It's a Galan, or Galland, I'm not sure which it is, Galland or Galan, but it has a very strange action on it. It's an old gun, 12 millimeter, it originally came from Belgium, but other countries like France and Russia liked it so much in the late 1800s, they started making them also. How does it work? Well, it's sort of almost a break open. What happens is, you take this little lever down here, pull it back, it releases the trigger guard, and the trigger guard becomes a handle, you slide it forward, and the whole front of the gun moves. The cylinder and the barrel just move forward, and that extracts the cartridges. Okay? So it's kind of a cool technique, sort of a lever action with your revolver to get it quickly unloaded and loaded. So it's certainly a lot better than single action, but expensive to make. Obviously, it has to be very fine tolerances and fine construction, but Russians really like it. But what they end up with making themselves, the Nagant 1895. There are other Nagants from the Nagant brothers, model 1891, 1894, primarily used in Belgium. But Russia said, we really like this Nagant, and we're going to make some improvements on it. And the improvement, if you're hopefully aware of, I have one here, and I think I can show you after I make sure that it's unloaded. Yes, it is. If you watch carefully, when I go to squeeze this trigger, you probably have to come up and see it yourself, but you can come up and do this yourself. If you squeeze the trigger, at some point the cylinder goes forward. Right now, it's going forward, and then it's locked up against the back of the barrel, okay? And then when you let go, it goes back again. Okay, so what's happening there? It's forming what they're calling a gas seal. All right, because the cartridge itself is really weird looking. The cartridge doesn't have a bullet. The bullet is inside, but you see the cartridge casing sticking out. Well, that front nose of the cartridge casing goes actually into the back of the barrel, and it forms like almost like a semi-automatic. You've got, now it's chambered, like it really chambered. There's no escaping gas. Really wasn't worth the effort because it makes for a really hard trigger. It doesn't really add much in terms of energy to the cartridge. But Russians thought it was neat, so they went in and did that.
Okay, Rich?
Yes.
The Nagant has, what, 7 cylinders?
Chambers?
Yeah, chambers.
6 or 7.
Yes.
It's 7?
Shot.
Thank you, 7.
Yeah, the only reason I point that out is if you want to play Russian roulette, 2 people each, you get 3 chances.
Hey, there you go. You're lucky, yeah. Cool. All right, so England way up here. Obviously really close to all the action going on here. So let's talk about what England had. First off, Bulldog revolver. Bulldog revolver was not accepted by the Army, it was commercial, but a lot of English troops and German troops liked it. Why would German troops like something like this? Why? Because they had that stupid Reichsrevolver that they hated. All right? So this is a better revolver than that, even though it's kind of, cheaply made, even compared to the Reichsrevolver. More importantly, Webley Green. This was actually was issued to the military. This now is that .455 caliber, and the .455 cartridge, by the way, kept evolving over time. So it changed over time. So just be a little careful when you look at loadings, which model of .455 is this loading for. But there's models 1889, 1892 that look like this, which are nice looking guns. Webley Fosbury. Anyone ever see one of these?
Oh, yeah.
These are cool. All right, so what does a Webley Fosbury do? The reason it looks so weird is because this whole part of the gun is one unit, and it slides back on recoil, cocks the hammer, and then these little things here actually cause the cylinder to turn, and what you now have is a semi-automatic revolver. All right, with each pull of the trigger, it cocks itself, and it turns the cylinder, so it's just like a semi-auto. Of course, you still only got like the 6 rounds or whatever in here, and now you also have a safety, because you might want to keep it cocked, or so you turn the safety on. So that was kind of a cool gun, really expensive, hard to make, would not hold up in the trenches with this kind of nonsense, so wasn't really used that much in World War I, but they were out there. Webley Mark I, followed by the Mark II, 3, 4, and 5, which all look kind of similar. All in .455, just continuing to make improvements, but it's kind of a clunky looking gun. And then we get to the Mark VI. This was in .455, used in World War I and World War II. And we do have an example here. It's one of the bigger revolvers up here. Originally chambered in .455. Okay, and it is a break open. So you can actually break it open. When you break it open, you're going to see it throw the rounds out of the cylinder, or the empty rounds out of the cylinder, and then just load it and close it again. Nice gun. I shot this one a lot, actually. This one, however, like most of them, have been converted to 45 ACP. They shaved the back of the cylinder, and now you use boom clips, and it's 45 ACP gun. Stan, your original is in 455 still?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So guys,
I didn't bring any Webleys.
I'm sorry?
I didn't bring any Webleys. You didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you could bring the weapon.
You didn't ask me to bring Webleys.
Oh, my mistake. Okay. So, nice gun. Okay, really, really like a brick, and works really well. They don't wear out. This one was not so successful. Really cool looking gun. The Webley 455 self-loading pistol model 1913. When they took it over into the trenches, it just didn't function. It was too fine tolerances, any dirt in there, the thing just locked up. Just didn't do that well. Kind of not easy to manufacture either. But a pretty looking gun in 455, but not used that much in World War I. Final country, United States. We all know what the United States looks like. What I wanted to show you on this map is, this map shows you all those countries in any color, okay, which were either Axis involved in the war or Allied involved in the war, that were somehow impacted by what happened during the war, okay, in terms of territory or losing troops or whatever it might be. So it's actually like all of Africa, okay? Most of Asia, certainly Australia and the British protectorates, but it was actually a very widespread war. It was truly a world war. Okay, here's a pistol that could work in a couple of collections. This was actually, used by Teddy Roosevelt on Charge Up San Juan Hill. Okay, he had this exact same model. It's a Colt New Army, 1892, 1903, 1905. We made improvements to it along the way. And I have 2 or 3 examples up here. Because the cool thing is, they're actually very cheap to buy. Still are, right? Still are really cheap. Like for, let me get, yeah, a couple $100 for one still in nice shape. All right, and this is history, right? This was issued for like the Spanish-American War. It was used in the Philippine insurrection, although not too successfully, which is why the U.S. Army said this .38 long Colt cartridge ain't cutting it. All right, because we're hitting these people with multiple rounds and they're not going down. We need more stopping power. All right, and they said we need a new cartridge and a new gun. But they actually dragged this back, even after they had replaced it with bigger guns, dragged it back out of inventory. Why? Because they needed it for people on guard duty, people doing things, guarding prisoners that weren't necessarily going to be on the battlefield. So it works. It's actually, kind of a fun cartridge, and you can still find the cartridge. So they replaced this with a Model 1909. This is all before World War I. Model 1909 is up here. It is a Colt. It is a very strong, heavy-duty gun, although don't put +P+ hunting rounds in it. This is an example of Heritage that actually blew up from doing that. But if you use regular 45 ACP, I'm sorry, 45 long Colt rather, use regular 45 long Colt, it's a great cartridge. And they still have lots of long Colt around because where else is the long Colt used?
That cartridge was actually made with a slightly bigger rim than the 45.
Ah, yes, you're right. You're right.
You can't load it in a single action, chamber to chamber. You have to go every other chamber.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they had a little ejection problem, so they made the rim slightly bigger.
Right. Yep, exactly. I'd forgotten about that. But here they said this was a great cartridge for us, 45 long Colt. Let's bring it forward and let's use it here. And they were actually pretty happy with this gun, but of course, 1909, 2 years before the 1911, so it didn't have a really long life. All right, it didn't become like our standard service gun for any period of time. But it was used, and it was certainly used in World War I. Colt New Service. This was actually for England. There's an example of it up here.
Yeah.
This gun right here. You have one also?
Yeah.
Cool. And this one is still in 455. Yours is still 455. Cool. And I fired it at 455. It's a fun gun. But it's a regular Colt New Service. The only ones we made in 455 were for England. Colt Army Special. 38, first 38 Special Colt. Actually sold to England and Greece early on, but more as an emergency gun. And it wasn't a lot of quantity. Colt 1903 Pocket Automatic. I have an example here. He's got a cool example over there. If you want to talk to him about his example, it's actually kind of got some cool history on it. This one's at 32 ACP, Belgium and England, and manufactured here in the United States. It is a Colt. Nice gun. And is this the one that Patton used to carry?
One of the guns.
One of the guns,
He
yeah.
might have carried the one in 380, but
Oh, you're right. It was the same gun in 380. Yeah, that's right. But a nice gun. Very accurate, nice gun, very slim. Still usable today as a pocket pistol. Savage model 1907. What? Savage? 1907? Yeah, it was actually bought by France and Portugal. The example I have up here with its original holster, somewhere, right here. It's a 1907 Savage. Looks almost like any other, except it has the hole down here for the lanyard loop. A couple of other little things in the ejection port that are different. French needed to have because they had to be different. But actually I got the factory letter from Savage that says, yes, this gun and this serial number actually were part of the shipment to France, which is only like maybe, I don't know, 20,000 guns max. But it's actually, you know, kind of a cute 32 ACP. I'm not sure it belongs on the battlefield. But Portugal also bought some of these. The ones that came back from Portugal are going to be hard to distinguish because I'm not sure of the serial number range, but they came back and replaced the Portuguese grips that they had put on with the standard Savage grips as it came back into the States. So I'm not sure how to tell that you got a Portuguese one. French one's easy though, based on a couple of things. Serial number range and also the language. Okay, hey, 1911. There's no surprise, I'm not going to spend any time on it now, but 45 ACP. This Colt 1911, you know, became our standard firearm. We sold also a bunch to England in 455, France in 45 ACP, Russia in 45 ACP, right? Yeah. And US, certainly we use it for 45 ACP. I'm not going to spend time on it here because everyone knows about the 1911. Let's move on to the next gun. Because we couldn't make the 1911 quickly enough, we could make the 45 ACP ammo quickly enough, we came out with a couple of new revolvers. Again, not for use on the front line so much, but for use by MP, for use behind the lines, guard duty, and so on. So they took the new service Colt and created a model 1917 that took 45 ACP, and you loaded that via moon clip, as you'll see in the next picture. Colt model 1917, very strong new service pistol. I shot the heck out of mine. It loves all loads, it works great. And actually there's another picture of mine with the lanyard loop and also the half moon clips. Oops, the wrong way. The half moon clips and there's 3 dummy rounds of 45 loaded moon clips and that fun device to get them out of the clip after you're done so you can reuse the clip or reload the ammunition. All right, but actually, you know, it was very easy to load by just dropping in 2 half moon clips in the back of the chamber and then closing it. So handy gun. Smith & Wesson was also contracted to make a bunch in 45 ACP, called the Smith & Wesson model 1917, made in about half the quantity, I think, of the Colts, so a little rarer. But also, there was an earlier version of this called the Smith & Wesson hand ejector that was sold to England earlier in 1917, early in the war, in 455, sort of like what they did with the Colt that I showed you. Okay, so we covered a lot of stuff here. And hopefully I gave you a good sense of why these little handguns, why I think they're cool to collect, you know, certainly compared to trying to collect every known model of a Luger or every known model of a 1911. There's tremendous variety here. Again, a lot of these are very shootable, particularly the ones like 32 ACP, 380, and so on, 9mm. Right, so with that, any questions? Oh, put it back on? Okay, great. Okay, thank you. One last thing I mentioned is if you're looking for the best books on World War I pistols, this one's sort of the best because it's got 1 page in every pistol, which is good.